So kind of going along with international trade, we want to spend some time talking about foreign exchange. And I actually think this is something that some of you might be familiar with, especially if you've traveled to a foreign country sometime recently. Because whenever you go to another country, as you know, oftentimes they don't accept US dollars. And so whenever we go to another country, you have to exchange your US dollars for whatever that country's currency is. So foreign exchange is just the idea that different currencies are used to facilitate trade. What we're essentially seeing is different currencies are being bought and sold on a market that we refer to as the foreign exchange market. So just like we had the product market where products were being bought and sold, or we had the factor market where the factors of production were being bought and sold, here we have the foreign exchange market, and that's the market where currencies are being bought and sold. This is sometimes referred to as Forex, the foreign exchange market. And so what we end up seeing is just like any other market, supply and demand forces are at work. And then the price is determined by the supply and demand. And we call that price, and the idea that this price is changing, we call this idea a floating exchange rate, the idea that this price of one currency changes over time. Now, one thing we need to understand, and this is kind of a weird way of thinking about it, but in the same way that you or I might go to the store and we might buy a gallon of milk, right? Well, what you do is you go and you say, all right, this gallon of milk is $2, right? And so you hand over $2 in exchange for a gallon of milk. Well, in the same way that you're buying a good when you go to the store, when you do that foreign exchange where you're exchanging your currency, you are actually buying another currency. But this time you might be handing over $2 in exchange for, 200 yen or something along those lines. And so what we end up seeing is that these exchange rates are actually the selling prices of different currencies. A foreign exchange rate is just the price of one country's currency in terms of another. So let's take a look at one that we might be familiar with. Let's think about the euro. So the euro is the currency that is used in the European Union. And what we end up seeing is that recently, based on exchange rates, we would say that 1 euro buys a certain amount of US dollars. Well, according to the foreign exchange rates, we say that 1 euro can be exchanged for $1.18. But really what this is saying is that if you were to walk up to one of those little kiosks where you exchange currency and you say, all right, I have 1 euro, how many US dollars can I buy with this? They would say you can buy $1.18. Now, in the same way, if you wanted to purchase 1 euro, you would have to use $1.18 to buy 1 euro. This is known as the exchange rate, 1 euro for $1.18. But really what we're doing is we're just saying the selling price of 1 euro is $1.18, and the selling price of $1.18 is 1 euro. Now, in the same sense, what we end up seeing here is, okay, how much can $1 then buy? Right? We know it takes $1.18 to buy a full euro, but if we want to keep things nice and clean and we say, okay, well, what about just $1? 1 US dollar buys how many euros? Well, we could do the math here, and we'll show how to do this later. We show that 1 US dollar can buy 0.84 euros. And in the same sense, it takes 0.84 euros to buy 1 US dollar. So let's see how this whole supply and demand thing kind of plays in here. We're going to label our graph, our supply and demand graph here. And this specifically is going to be the supply and demand for US dollars. So we're going to have the quantity of US dollars there on our x-axis, the price of US dollars on our y. But here's what we got to do. We have to say, all right, if this is the price of US dollars, how much does 1 US dollar cost? Well, 1 US dollar costs 1 US dollar. So we can't be doing the price of a US dollar in terms of US dollars. We have to do the price of US dollars in terms of something else. So we're going to do the price of a US dollar, but in terms of euros. So what we want to understand is what is the price of $1, but in terms of euros. We'll have the demand for the dollar, and the demand is just the total amount of US dollars that foreigners demand on the foreign exchange market. Because remember, this is the supply and demand on the foreign exchange market. You and I don't demand US dollars on the foreign exchange market because we already have them, right? And so who's demanding US dollars? Well, it's foreigners who are wanting to buy US goods and they need US dollars. We also have the supply for the US dollars. Who supplies US dollars on the foreign exchange market? Well, the people who hold US dollars, typically Americans, because that is their currency. They hold US dollars, and so they supply the US dollars to the foreign exchange market. So the demanders are the ones who don't have these US dollars who want them, and the suppliers are the ones who do have the US dollars and are making them available. So there we have our equilibrium. Our equilibrium, again, is where our supply and our demand meet. And what we end up seeing is the price currently of $1 US in terms of euros is 0.84 euros. And so that is our current price. That equilibrium in euros represents the quantity of it represents when the quantity of US dollars demanded is equal to the quantity of US dollars being supplied. But we need to make sure we understand why there is this whole demanding and supplying of dollars taking place. So why do foreigners demand US dollars on the foreign exchange market? Well, foreigners must have US dollars in order to purchase US goods and services. Now, what we end up seeing is that the law of demand is still relevant. If the price of the US dollar is really high, the demand for the US dollar decreases. And so here's what we mean by that. If the price of the US dollar is really expensive in terms of euros, the people who hold euros aren't going to want to purchase a lot of US dollars because US dollars are really expensive in terms of their currency. And so the quantity demanded is going to go down. Now, as the price of the US dollar goes down, as the US dollar gets cheaper, Europeans are more likely to buy more US dollars. Maybe they'll buy more US dollars so that they can go on vacation in the US or buy goods from the US. And so again, the demanders are just those who do not hold US dollars but would like to in order to purchase US goods and services. Now, when it comes to the supply, who exactly is the supplier? And when we say it's Americans, why do Americans supply US dollars to the foreign exchange market? Well, in the same way that foreigners will demand US dollars, US citizens will demand other currencies, right? And in order to receive other currencies, we must provide US dollars. So for example, say I go to England and I want to buy British pounds, their currency. Well, in order to be a demander of the pound, I then have to give up US dollars. Therefore, I would be supplying US dollars, right? And again, law of supply is still very relevant. If the price of the US dollar increases, the supply of the US dollar increases. Now, here's the reason. If the price of the US dollar, if it's really expensive, what that means is the US dollar holds a lot of power in a sense. And therefore, more US citizens are willing to supply their US dollars because they say, hey, look, my US dollar is now worth more. I can get more for it. Maybe I can get more euros for my US dollar now. And so they're more willing to supply the US dollar. Now, as the US dollar decreases in value, the supply of the US dollar is also going to decrease because Americans will look at that and be like, wow, the US dollar is very weak right now. It's not worth a whole lot. And so it's more expensive for me to travel overseas because I can't buy as many euros with my dollar as I used to be able to. And so again, like we said, this is the same supply and demand we saw in Unit 2. Those same forces of supply and demand are still at play.